How are you? It's so great to see so many familiar faces. I'm so happy to see everyone. Since the last time I saw most of you, I've had a baby, and it's good to be back. I'm not going to thank you. Yes, I'll take it. What I really wanted to do today was like a 3-hour slide deck of baby pictures just to get you all up to date on what I've been doing, but I was told that was a little off topic. And so I will talk to you about my second favorite topic, the Conservation Improvement Program, and some of the work that we had been doing prior to baby. My life is divided up into before baby and now after baby. But what we started then and some of the results from some of our potential study work and kind of where we're headed. We'll have a good conversation with panelists who were involved in the workings of the study and hopefully have a good conversation around the state of demand-side management and the Conservation Improvement Program today. So to start, coffee, pastries out there. We're getting ready and kicking off now. We're going to do a project team presentation with a Q&A, panel discussion, some closing remarks, and there will be a little bit of a reception afterwards. I don't think I introduced myself. I just kind of walked in assuming all of you know who I am. My name is Jessica Burdett. I work with the Department of Commerce, the Division of Energy Resources. I'm a state energy office manager. I've been working in the Conservation Improvement Program for about 10 years now in some capacity or another. I used to do some consulting work for utilities, but I've been at the department for a while now, giving the utilities a hard time. Welcome everyone. So what we're really going to talk about is what the next decade looks like for efficiency potential in Minnesota. As we see technology evolution, as we see greater decarbonization of our electric power system and different impacts of our efficiency and renewable energy efforts over the last decade, we thought it'd be a good idea to take a look at what's the next decade going to look like. How have the markets evolved? How have the technologies evolved? And what does that mean for our continued ability to meet some of our existing public policy goals around energy efficiency? So, given that, just a bit of history, CIP has been around for a really long time, for a little over 35 years. It started in the early 1980s with some Public Utility Commission directed work for utilities to have efficiency programs. It moved on to having some spending requirements for utilities to actually just spend some dollars on efficiency and conservation, to the landmark year of 2007 when the Next Generation Energy Act was passed, and it actually implemented an energy savings requirement in addition to spending requirements. And since then, there's been significant activity, concerted activity by all of our utilities, investor-owned utilities, municipal and cooperative utilities, to work with their customers, all segments of customers, commercial, industrial, residential, low income, to implement efficiency and achieve what at the time were some of the most aggressive energy savings goals in the nation. So, just to give you an idea of kind of the landscape we're working in, this shows all of the electric utility territories divided into the co-ops, municipals, and investor-owned utilities. The diagram on the right breaks down electric loads by utility type and market sector. So I have to tell you, when we were working in the technical advisory committees for the DSM potential study that Carl Nelson will talk about a little bit later, there was just this ooh, ah, gasp of all the energy efficiency geeks in this room at this Sankey chart. We had never seen anything quite like it, broken up. We've seen Sankey charts before, but not quite like this. And so there were a lot of geeks that were very happy in the room with this. So I enjoyed that very much. So Then you can see on the left the territories broken down by actual utilities. So you can see Great River Energy in the dark blue where they span. But we have a lot of utilities. There's over 170 electric utilities. The IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, serve 2/3 of the load, while cooperatives comprise the majority of the geographical territory. There's also, when you look at the chart on the left, kind of a breakdown where you can see the customer segments, the residential, commercial, industrial, and opt-out. So you can see that investor-owned utilities have, approximately 32% residential, 35%, that's really small on my screen, commercial, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see that there's different customer mixes for different utility types, which always presents challenges when we try to make blanket policy or when we try to make blanket statements about utilities and what they can achieve and what potential is available, given that utilities types, utility locations have a variety of service territory challenges. So then we also have natural gas utilities. We have investor-owned natural gas utilities and municipal utilities and privately held utilities. You can see that the vast majority of natural gas in the state is through an investor-owned utility. You can see that there's, with the investor-owned, kind of an even mix of residential, commercial, industrial. We also have a segment of our customer base that has opted out of the Conservation Improvement Program that does not have access to SIP offerings from utilities. So something significant maybe to take away from this is that 17% of residential customers in Minnesota use electricity as their primary heating source, and that'll be really important consideration as we think about future potential for conservation and efficiency for natural gas utilities. So I mentioned earlier in the SIP background history that a landmark year was in 2007 with the Next Generation Energy Act passage. So we really kind of start benchmarking progress and achievement and efficiency. The savings from about 2007, 2008 onward, the savings goal actually took effect in 2010. And so as you can see, we've continued to have trends upwards in utilities progress and ability to meet the goal. And the utilities, since the savings goal went into effect, have consistently met the goal since it was established as a whole. Likewise with natural gas. Now, within our efficiency framework, the Commissioner of Commerce has the ability to approve a lower goal of no less than 1%. And for the natural gas utilities, based on our understanding of the market and their potential, they have a lower goal of 1%. But given that, they've consistently met or exceeded collectively achievement of that 1% goal over time. And in 2017, for instance, CenterPoint Energy had one of its most successful years ever in terms of energy savings. So, as I mentioned, we decided, it's been 10 years, give or take, since the Next Generation Energy Act was passed, and it's been a while. While since individual utilities have undertaken some of their own potential studies, it had really been a while since we stepped back and took a kind of collective statewide look at what is, our ability to continue to achieve the existing goals, what are the changes in technologies, what's been done. A lot of times we hear about low-hanging fruit having been plucked and that it's no longer there. And so really, what's happening out there? So we decided to embark on this study. We issued a request for proposal. There was a competitive process. And ultimately, we selected a project team that was able to engage with stakeholders, as well as bring analytical abilities to the table. We wanted to make sure that we didn't get just kind of a cookie cutter report that was placed on our desk that we didn't do anything with in the end. But we really wanted to engage with utilities and other stakeholders to understand what their specific challenges are and what they're seeing in the market to make sure that we had the best available data at our hands, as well as, and I'm going to suck up to the panel here real quick who is involved, the best and the brightest in the Conservation Improvement Program to inform some of the direction of our study, the methodology, as well as some of the policy conclusions and program recommendations that we came to at the end of the study. So we estimated statewide electric and natural gas efficiency for 2020 to 2029. Boy, I just realized the 2020s might be a difficult period for us. Coincidentally, this coincides with 3 different triennial periods for the investor-owned utilities, and that was at some level intentional. We also wanted to produce some actionable resources through program recommendations and our understanding of findings and engage stakeholders. So the team that really led the charge on developing developing the methodology, the findings, and putting this final results together for us was the Center for Energy and Environment and Optimal Energy and Seventh Wave. We've worked with these partners over the years and trust a lot of the work that they do in terms of how they're able to engage with us and our stakeholders, as well as their analytical abilities. And so we're pleased to have this team to be able to present to you some of the results that we think will help inform us as we move into the future. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Carl Nelson, who's with Center for Energy and Environment, and he'll walk us through the study results and bring us into the panel discussion. Thanks, Carl.
All right. Thank you, Jessica, and thanks for moderating and welcoming us to this session. Thanks, everyone, for coming. We were supposed to have some of the other study team members here today, but we got a call from Seventh Wave yesterday that they wouldn't be able to make it because their office is in Madison, Wisconsin, and they didn't want to drive into the ditch with the snow we were having. So it's just me presenting the results. And I am not going to, I know we have a lot of geeks in here today, but I'm not going to bore you. I'm not going to get that geeky with methodology, but a couple of things I would point out about this methodology is we looked at over 300 different measures, gas and electric measures for this study and 20 different customer segments. But we know when you're looking at a time period that is more than 10 years out, that we're going to be missing some things. So, for example, we just looked at technologies that were commercially ready or we felt would be commercially ready in a very short period of time. And so the only thing that we know for certain about the screening and the technology screening that we did was that there definitely will be things that will become viable during that study period that we did not include in the study. And we're going to be hearing a little bit about potentially one of those technologies from one of our panelists later today. The other thing I would say about the methodology is we ground truthed a lot of the assumptions that we used through primary data collection. We did both telephone surveys as well as audits and site visits in about 130 different buildings for the on-site and about 1,700 phone surveys as well throughout the state. This was a statewide potential study. We looked at calculating 4 different kinds of potential, technical potential. Of the technical potential, how much of that is cost effective or economic, and then 2 program scenarios. And that's really what we're going to focus on mostly in presenting the results today, are the 2 scenarios of maximum achievable and then program potential. So for maximum achievable, we looked at the subset of what is economic, considering market barriers, but given aggressive incentives and strong programs. So we assume that for technologies that would have rebates, that those would be set at 100% of the incremental costs over the non-efficient version. And we have very high technology adoption rates as well. And then for the program scenario, we looked at about 50% incentives for that scenario. And just to give you a sense of where programs are at right now with the incentives, Excel, I think, is about 34% is what their average incentive is right now in their current programs. So even the program potential scenario is a little bit higher than what utilities are using for their incentives right now. So diving right into the high-level results here, this is for electric utilities. So you can see that we have, compared to our baseline electric use, the overall economic potential can reduce that by about 1/3. And the program, or the maximum achievable, captures about a little more than, or the program potential captures about half of that total economic potential, and the maximum achievable captures about 2/3 of the total economic potential there in 2029. So looking at what this means year by year in terms of achieving the state energy goals, which are expressed as first-year savings or the annual average savings, we're seeing about 1.8% on the program side, and the maximum achievable about 2.5%. You'll notice that in 2022, let's see, we see a big drop here, and that's due to the lighting standards going into place and being adopted over that period of time. So you're seeing a big drop in general service lamps lighting, which is primarily residential lighting. And then gradually that gets replaced with other end uses over the study period time. So looking at the different end uses and where that comes from, the residential sector overall for electric utilities is responsible for about 20% of the overall savings, and the commercial and industrial responsible for about 80% of total savings. Within residential, you can see that lighting is a very small portion of the total savings in 2029. This is cumulative 2029 savings from the program potential scenario. Some of the end uses that replace lighting, the biggest one is space heating within the electric sector here, representing about 35% of the total potential. And we did not consider fuel switching for this potential study, so we didn't look at potential of propane customers, for example, that switch to electric. This is only looking at the homes that already have electric, which is about 17%, as Jessica had mentioned, of the state. So it's only looking at that 17% of homes, and what you could do to increase the efficiency of there. The reason why that is so large, even with a smaller portion of homes, is that for the homes that heat with electricity, they use a lot of electricity. It's obviously day like today, people know that it's cold in Minnesota, and those homes that heat with electricity use about double the electricity of a home that heats with another source. So there's a lot to be saved there. Within the commercial and industrial sector, lighting still is the biggest source of potential there at 25%, but there's a number of other end uses that rise in importance compared to where they are today. Refrigeration, system efficiency, and motors in particular. System efficiency includes measures that affect multiple end uses, and such as building control system, building automation systems that use controls to make the whole system operate more efficiently. So things like that are going to become more important over the next 10 years. So looking at what are some of the top measures that are driving this, as I mentioned, we looked at over 300 different measures, but these are the ones that are most important within the residential sector. And two of those are cold climate air source heat pumps. So we have the version called a mini split that is for individual rooms, and then a central air source heat pump, which is for the whole house. Together, they represent about 20% of total savings in the residential sector. Thermostats, also very important, and especially the newer kind of smart thermostats that have become more popular recently. Within the commercial sector, we see a mixture of tried and true measures as well as some newer ones. Integrated building design is a new construction or remodeling measure. Variable speed drive has been around for a long time, but there are a lot of motors that do not use that, where there's a lot of potential for that. And then we have two that are related to lighting, both lighting design, improved lighting design, for remodeling or new construction, as well as lighting controls. And the last one is a refrigeration measure for larger refrigeration spaces. Turning to natural gas utilities, we see a similar amount of economic potential, about a third, the ability to reduce usage by about a third, but less program and max achievable potential. The program potential is able to capture about a third of that total economic potential, and max achievable about half of that total potential. So how that looks like year to year is about a 1.8%, 2% for the max achievable, and a little under 1.5% on the program side. For the end uses, residential is about twice as much use as, has about twice as much potential as for electric utilities, about 40%, commercial industrial at 60%. So in general, for the natural gas utilities, that residential sector is more important in achieving their overall goals. There are less end uses, there's just less gadgets for gas. So space heating dominates, although for the commercial sector, some of that system efficiency, those building controls, automation systems are a big part of the potential there. Within the gas top 5 measures for residential, Again, there's less measures in general, so each of those measures has a higher importance within the natural gas sector. Condensing furnaces and boilers have long been the mainstay for these programs, and there still is a lot of potential for increasing adoption of those technologies. And smart thermostats, as we talked about before, is important. Attic insulation, air sealing, still a lot of homes that could use more insulation in Minnesota, older homes. And the only emerging tech measure that is in this top 5 is aerosol envelope sealing. And that's an automated method. Whoops. This one here, that's an automated method that injects an aerosol sealant into the home, and under a pressurized situation with a blower door, it forces that aerosol to automatically seal up spaces. So it's possible to get a lot more air sealing done than is possible with manual methods, and thus it's responsible for creating a lot of savings. In the commercial sector, there's a lot of variety here in what can be done. The smart thermostat for smaller commercial buildings is again a big one. The boilers and condensing furnaces still are important in the commercial sector as well. Total emissions reductions on the CO2 side for the electric, this is from the program potential in 2029, are about equivalent to 1/3 of Minnesota's 1.6 million single-family homes. So that's a pretty big impact on the electric side. On the gas side, a little bit less carbon intensity there, so about 1/6 of Minnesota's single-family homes, the equivalent emissions of what comes from 1/6 of Minnesota's single-family homes. We also looked at program budgets. These budgets are roughly about double what current spending is right now, although we are seeing increased savings as well too from that, so you have to keep that in mind. However, the total cost is still less than 2 cents per kilowatt hour for on the electric side, and less than 30 cents a therm on the gas side. So it still is cheapest form for new generation, even with increasing budgets. Looking at the overall net benefits from the societal perspective, which includes the benefits of reduced emissions, we're seeing about $2.20 for every dollar spent. So that's pretty good. It's a little bit less than what we're seeing right now, but it's still providing double the benefits for every dollar that's spent. And on the utility side, where you're just looking at the utilities costs and the benefits that utilities get from building less power plants and so forth, it's by coincidence turns out to be exactly the same, $2.20 of benefits. And when we were doing, just for the geeks in here too, for the utility cost test, we used the weighted average cost of capital is what that stands for utilities, which is about 7% discount rate. So we also looked at what programs are accomplishing and best practices across the country as well as within the state, and in terms of what would be needed to achieve the potential that we've outlined. And 2 themes emerge from looking at Minnesota's existing programs. First of all, we have a strong foundation of effective SIP programs. As Jessica mentioned, we have a long history in Minnesota of working on SIP programs, and there's a lot of good practices being done out there. Even among the largest utilities with lots of resources, but even among a lot of smaller utilities where you might think they don't have as many resources to implement some more proactive program designs. And then secondly, partnerships have helped increase program effectiveness. And in particular, trade allies or the contractors that actually install energy efficient equipment have really helped utilities to deliver programs. That's a very important relationship. Not a surprise to those who run programs, but that has been very successful in Minnesota. The smaller utilities, we heard a lot about the challenges that they face, but where they have been successful is when they cooperate and deliver joint programs, for example, across multiple territories. And then also in cooperating, we're increasingly seeing cooperation between the natural gas utilities and the electric utilities. And that creates efficiencies in program design as well as in for the customer, because they don't have to deal with two different programs, they can just deal with one. So looking at how those current programs will need to evolve, the biggest one is that lighting is the biggest source of savings right now, and utilities will need to transition to an increased diversity of end uses. Right now, lighting is responsible for about close to 70% of the total savings. And these are the same charts that we saw before for electric. And you can see lighting decreases considerably over where it is right now. So, as we talked about before, looking at some of those other end uses and how to get to those customers with those end uses is the crux of the challenge. A bright spot here was air source heat pumps and the potential that they showed. This is really something that, had we done this potential study 5 years ago, the technology was not ready and wouldn't have been possible, wouldn't have showed up in our potential as being such a large source of savings. So in one sense, it is the LED, the new LEDs. It is the technology advancement that has occurred to enable new savings that didn't exist before. It's not on the same scale as lighting, but it is pretty significant. And you can see here that the portion of households having electricity as primary heating source, it can be over 27% in some areas of the state, primarily in the rural areas where they do not have as much access to natural gas. And this just shows that, just kind of expands on that point some more. In particular, the rural co-ops, where they have their customers, 21% of them on average are heating with electricity. Only, they have a higher portion of homes heating with electricity than natural gas. Majority are propane or other. And for both their heating and their water heating as well. So, just diving into the air source heat pump a little bit more, this is an example of the mini split, which many of you may have seen. It has an outdoor unit and then an indoor header. It's similar to, the functioning of it is similar to an air conditioner, which is a form of heat pump. But it can operate at temperatures that are below zero and produce useful heat from that. And like I say, that is something that is just recently. We've had mini splits for a long time, but the ability to operate at colder temperatures is something that is new. And within programs, there's quite a bit of potential for that as well too, because most of the mini splits and air source heat pumps being sold in Minnesota today are not the cold climate version. So they are not providing the benefit to the saving, to getting the full savings for the electric heat on the electric heating side. On the natural gas side, the residential sector again is going to be the most important, and in particular, the newest kind of technology. We saw a lot of technologies, furnaces and boilers that have been around for a while, but the newest technology, the change here is within thermostats, which represent about 22% of that total end use. And there is a lot of potential for increasing there. Some of the primary data collection that we did showed that about 7% of homes right now have smart thermostats. So there's a lot of potential to grow that over the next decade. It will also be important, I should note too, because it is a newer technology, to make sure that we are really achieving the potential for savings there, and that programs are using the thermostats that really work at getting that savings, and that we're accurately tracking and measuring that. So there's a research side of that as well too, that we need to be careful that those thermostats achieve the savings that they can over the next year. We also looked in our best practices to make some specific recommendations for utilities. A lot of utilities are already doing this, but this is really what needs to be done and continue to be done to achieve the kind of potential that we've been talking about. I'm not going to go through all of this, but more detail is in our report, which is on our web site. On the coordination among utilities, I just wanted to point out here that although we have over 170 utilities in the state, cooperatives and munis being the biggest in number, a lot of them are already organized in some fashion by the power aggregator that they work with. And some of these power aggregators, most of these power aggregators, are involved in helping their members to run the energy efficiency programs that they do within their territory. So this is an important structure in helping individual utilities to cooperate and to achieve a little more scale than they might have in an individual small utility. As Jessica mentioned, we also had an advisory committee. In addition to reviewing some of the technical work that we did and some of our assumptions, we also looked at policy in terms of what could help to, what's going to be necessary and what can help to further achieve the potential that has been identified on the technical side. And you can see here who was on that committee. A lot of the utilities, a lot of the panelists that we're going to hear from later were also on the advisory committee too. And we really had, on the policy side, three kind of topic areas that fell out in our discussions with advisory committee members. The first was the statute itself, the 1.5% goal that Jessica talked about. And on the technical side, I think our potential study shows that at least on a statewide level, this goal can continue to be achieved using existing flexibility to adjust goals when justified. Another point about that, at least for the investor-owned utilities, they have an incentive mechanism for exceeding that goal, and that incentive mechanism has been successful because we have seen, as Jessica showed in her slides, that utilities have exceeded the 1.5% when they had the opportunity to do so because they are economically incented to do that. So just because it's 1.5% goal doesn't mean that utilities are going to stop there if there is more potential to be had. And then, we heard a lot about the challenges for smaller utilities. So that was another thing that we talked about was allowing customer-owned utilities to report savings in a multi-year framework, giving them some more flexibility. They might have a large customer in 1 year that gives them a huge amount of savings and they dramatically exceed their goal in that year, but they might have trouble in future years with that. So that flexibility is particularly important for the smaller utilities. The second topic area we discussed is a regulatory oversight of SIP. I guess I'd point out here too that we did a survey of stakeholders, and what we found was, for the most part, the stakeholders, utilities, and those that participate in regulatory filings are pretty happy with the regulatory framework that we have, with a few exceptions. So I think there's a lot of good that is happening already with regulatory oversight, and there were a few things that might be able to improve on that, like the creation of a SIP guide to be a little bit more transparent and on the same page about some of the particular policies, regulatory policies for implementing SIP, formal advisory committee, and strong research and development, because that is what's going to lead to the savings of tomorrow, is that R&D. And then this was a big topic of looking at demand response and efficient fuel switching and incorporating that into the energy efficiency, the SIP framework. So demand response is also called load management. That's when utilities have programs to shift load from their customers from times of peak to times of off-peak usage. And so that has a lot of benefits in reducing costs. It can really help provide significant co-benefits to end-use efficiency. A lot of from a program standpoint, the customers are the same customers that you're working with on the energy efficiency side. So there are some benefits, efficiencies in combining those efforts together with the energy efficiency efforts as well. And then also, as we increasingly have more renewables on the grid, having that ability to shift load to times when renewables are producing power is going to be more important in the future too. So a lot of people felt that this would be something that could be more strongly promoted within our energy efficiency framework. And then secondly, efficient fuel switching, which is shifting from one source to another for your energy usage. So this is also called beneficial electrification when you're converting to electric usage. And there is quite a bit of potential for energy efficiency within that. This was something, again, that our study did not look at, fuel switching, but particularly with air source heat pumps and some of the other newer technologies, there could be a lot of potential from efficient fuel switching, particularly from some of the more expensive delivered fuels to some of the newer technologies like air source heat pumps. And then finally, we there should be some safeguards to make sure if we do incorporate these things that we're not decreasing end-use efficiency inadvertently. And that is it. Here's the link where you can download the full report. By the end of the month, too, we will have an online reporting tool. So for those data geeks here, this will look at what is the potential at an individual utility or group of utilities. From the study, it basically looks at it at a measure-by-measure level by end use, by different customer segments, so you can get a lot more detail on the outputs from our report by going to this online reporting tool. That's it for the study. Now I'd like to invite the panelists to come up for the next section of our agenda here, and we'll hear some reactions to some of the findings that we just talked about. This will just be a minute while we get set up here.
Watching Google Maps from 8:30 arrival, 8:45 to 9:00. I'm stuck there. Yeah. Well, as long as I get there before 10, I'm okay.
All right. Part 2. Welcome, panelists. Hopefully you're prepared for this. I do want to note, as we move into this next section, that we do have one very important panelist that couldn't join us today. Lisa Severson, who is the Energy Conservation Coordinator at Minn Kota Power Cooperative, couldn't make it. It was a long, treacherous drive, and her voice in the technical advisory and policy advisory committees was very important and critical, and we're sad that she wasn't here today, but we will prevail and we will continue, we will persevere without her. So, moving on, just to start with an introduction for the rest of the panelists. To start, we have Jason Grenier. Hi, Jason. He is the Market Planning Manager at Otter Tail Power Company. Jason has over 15 years of experience in the electric utility industry, including 11 years with Otter Tail, and currently oversees the development and marketing of Otter Tail's energy conservation, demand response, small-scale solar, and electric vehicle customer offerings across the company's North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota service areas. Then we also have John O'Neill, who is the Manager of Energy Efficiency and Member Support Programs at Southern Minnesota Municipal Power Agency and is responsible for all things DSM at SIMPA. He develops new energy-saving initiatives for SIMPA's 18-member utilities to help them cost-effectively meet their conservation improvement program goals. Then we have Ben Passer, who is the Director of Energy Access and Equity at Fresh Energy. Ben directs Fresh Energy's work to advance equitable outcomes across Minnesota's energy system with a focus on energy efficiency and renewable energy to benefit rental households and low-income communities. Then we have Sean White, who is the Manager of DSM Strategy at Xcel Energy. Sean is tasked with ensuring the long-term viability of Xcel's nationally recognized DSM portfolio and the regulatory compact it operates in. He's been with Xcel for 18 years and has been responsible for the implementation of energy efficiency programs and managed the energy efficiency implementation team for Xcel's Colorado territory before taking on his current role. And then finally, we have a new entrant to the conversation. Erin Viner is a senior program manager in the Market Strategy and Execution Group at the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. Erin evaluates promising natural gas energy-efficient technologies and works directly with industry and utility partners, paving the way for market launch. So with that, I have a whole list of questions for you. And hopefully, even though I have some prepared questions, we can make this more conversational, have a dialogue, and then also, as we go, incorporate audience questions if there are any. There's at least one microphone back there, and so if you have a question, just line up at the microphone and I'll keep an eye out, or John will tell me that there's people wanting to ask questions, and we'll go from there. So thank you, everyone. All right, so to start, for all the panelists, one of the program findings, and in our experience with existing programs, was that coordination among individual utilities could help improve overall results. So do you agree with this finding? And if you do, what are some of the ways that you are currently coordinating with new utilities, or what do you have maybe in the works to advance coordination activities? So I can either pick on you, I'll pick on you.
So, as a joint action agency, we work closely with our 18-member utilities to help them coordinate their SIP efforts. And even within our membership, we have our three largest members, Rochester, Austin, and Owatonna, who work even closer together as the triad to do a lot of joint marketing, because they are so closely located and within the same trade areas of retailers and trade allies. So with that, and we do coordinate or work together with Excel and some co-ops in the state on a fall lighting campaign, residential lighting, upstream lighting campaign. We work with, we will be working with actually gas utilities on a retro commissioning pilot program we're going to work on this year. So we're working with gas utilities on that. We have participated in some CERTS efforts, clean energy resource teams. They do a good job of, and other groups like them, do a good job on coordinating statewide SIP efforts and initiatives that utilities, including our members, can participate in. That's been a good model that's worked really well. So there's, I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration. But I think there are some challenges too. Utilities do want to keep their own identity and their own branding when marketing to customers. So that's been an issue in the past on some collaboration efforts. We have different customers that we maybe want to target in our service territories, different messaging, different incentive levels. So there's things that maybe have been some barriers for doing that, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate, and it can provide some benefits.
Yeah.
In addition to John's comments, there are good benefits to doing that kind of collaboration, especially when you're serving different fuels. There's a clear benefit to both utilities and the customer for doing that. I would say one of the frustrations of the trade organizations that we work with, that we're trying to partner with and get them to sell efficient technology, one of their big complaints is, I hate it when I don't know what the rebate level is until I ask the customer who their utility is. Varying rebate levels and things like that. And there's reasons for that. Certainly, we touched on cost effectiveness in the potential study, to identify what's cost effective. Well, each utility has different avoided costs or different benefits, based on their specific system, which can drive then the program parameters that drive the rebate levels and the priorities from a technology standpoint that can do that. But those are things to overcome to get to the benefits. And we are doing some great partnerships with especially natural gas utilities in our electric-only territories and with you folks and trying to smooth those pathways down. I can think of 3 off the top of my head, but there are probably more.
Just a little bit about Otter Tail Power for those of you that don't know. So we're an investor-owned utility serving the western third of Minnesota, about 62,000 customers. Our largest community is Bemidji. Our average size community is only about 400 people though, so very rural. So to think about a community of 400 people, usually you may have a cafe, post office, grain elevator, a gas station, something like that. But a lot of our communities, I think 30 out of the 150 communities we serve have natural gas. So it might be a little bit more challenging for us to have partnerships with other utilities. I think as far as partnerships, there's kind of 2 areas to focus on. I mean, we obviously collaborate on the program development side with Excel and the other IOUs, and maybe even look at some of the programs that the cooperatives or munis are offering too. So on the program development side, we're always looking at each other's triennial plans and things like that and making sure we're not missing anything. On the program implementation side, I know Ben and I were just actually talking about this last week, where in Bemidji, we were working with the gas company up there on doing some measures in some apartment buildings in Bemidji. And so a lot of success there. We never turn another utility down. We want to do projects. I know we worked with cooperatives, the natural gas company, Great Plains in Fergus Falls. We worked with them on doing school kits in the schools with the kids. We work with Minn Kota on workshops for contractors to educate contractors. There's a building design. I know we've worked with the gas companies too in different areas too, efficiently designing buildings. So yeah, we're always willing to do that, and I see that going forward as well.
So I feel really fortunate to be here basically because of collaboration and coordination. NEA is an organization that's funded by about 140 electric utilities on our electric side and about 5 utilities on our gas side. So these utilities have made a really conscious effort to collaborate around bringing energy efficient products to market and accelerating their adoption. So again, I feel really fortunate to be here because of that coordination and collaboration, but also can kind of speak to some of the successes or lessons learned. And I think a few of the 2 that kind of jump to mind are really, by having that unified voice when we go to the market, who we're working with a lot around energy efficiency, bringing new products to the market, we go with one unified voice. So we can talk with manufacturers and distributors on behalf of a much broader group of utilities and ultimately a much larger number of customers. And so that really lends us a little bit more weight when we're having these discussions, but also it helps to streamline the communication so that manufacturers aren't getting outreach from 100 plus utilities. They're getting outreach from one organization, again, speaking with a unified voice. I think the other benefit that just comes to mind is really reducing risk. So in an environment where taking risks is sometimes really difficult on behalf of individual organizations, by coordinating and collaborating on bringing products to market or doing pilots or doing studies, you're really reducing the risk for any individual organization, and you're able to take some risks that you might not be able to. And again, I feel really fortunate, working on our natural gas team, we are really involved pretty early in product development because of the exciting technologies that are coming on natural gas energy efficiency. So again, I feel that what I get to do is the outcome of the coordination and collaboration amongst utilities and energy efficiency organizations.
And I would just add, I think coordination is particularly valuable in the low-income and multifamily segments that can really face some unique barriers for utilities to really effectively reach customers. It can take a lot more time and resources to reach customers. Financing can often be a barrier in the multifamily segment particularly. There's the split incentive issue between building owners and tenants. And so I think coordination is a really valuable opportunity to really effectively reach those segments. The report, I think, highlights Xcel Energy's and CenterPoint Energy's joint multifamily building efficiency program in particular, which I think is a strong model of utilities working together to kind of co-deliver programs. And as Jason mentioned, I think, a number of utilities around the state are definitely taking steps in that regard, trying projects with other utilities, testing out pilots, things of that nature. But I think coordination really, among utilities and even within utilities, trying to figure out where are customers falling through the cracks, even within our individual programs, but also with other entities such as service providers, program implementers, and then community action agencies, as well as financing entities. Taking steps to align utility programs with financing timelines, which can often be, a critical point to engage multifamily building owners. I think all of those pieces are really complicated and can be tricky to figure out, and are often challenges in themselves, but also provide a valuable opportunity to address some of the unique challenges in that sector.
That's great. Now, I think the example you brought up of Xcel and CenterPoint's multifamily program, it took a lot of time, effort, and coordination to develop that, and it was kind of I think as it did take a lot of time and resources, it's paid off over time to see the success and how it's become a holistic program that's addressing a lot of those needs that you've articulated. I think that's something that, from a department perspective, we hope to see more of as we continue on in achieving some of the SIP goals that we're talking about. So yeah, that's great. Okay, moving on. So I just put you all on notice. You saw that, right? Okay. Okay, so moving on. So within the residential sector, we saw that air source heat pumps were identified as one of the largest source of new savings opportunities. What barriers do you see to reaching this potential, and what programmatic strategies do you think will be important in overcoming some of these barriers?
I can speak a little bit to that. Having a lot of my prior experience is on ductless heat pumps and heat pump water heaters, so working a lot with air source heat pumps. Some of the challenges are, I think Carl mentioned really well, that earlier versions of the technology, or even technology that's currently available and currently being used on a broader scale, is not really the best that's suited for colder climates. The flip side and the positive side is that there is technology out there that is available that does really work well in these colder climates. So I think the keys are going to be increasing awareness of that technology. So, looking at ways to do potentially like preferred products lists, installation training or product training with trade allies, with distributors, and, partnering to kind of increase awareness there. And then really just creating or nurturing those relationships with the market to make sure that the appropriate technology is that's being featured in those trainings and promotions with trade allies.
To add on to that, I think education is going to be a big part of it, because it is a newer technology, and I think to get customers thinking that, in that process of thinking that, okay, well, let's see, you're going to heat my house when it's 0 degrees by taking the heat that's outside and putting it into my house, right? Seems a little counterintuitive, so I think that education will need to take place, because you're still going to need a backup heating source for those really cold days like we've experienced this winter. The cost implications, and so I think that education to share the knowledge about the benefits, the economic benefits of how that makes sense, why you can do this, why it's cost effective to do this. For us, we've been running an air source heat program for many years. We don't get a lot of participation in it. We're not claiming heating savings, because most of our member utilities have natural gas in the area, so there's not a lot of electric heating to begin with. So we haven't had that opportunity yet, unless we get to fuel switching and electrical benefication things that we can kind of take advantage of some of that. But I think that education is probably key, even with trade allies, customers, kind of everybody, to get them up to speed on the technology and how that can benefit them.
Yeah, I was going to add to that a little bit. So Otter Tail, we've been promoting heat pumps for many years with a great deal of success, and partly is to do because a lot of our communities, our customers don't have access to natural gas. In 2018 was the first year where we said we're only going to rebate heat pumps that are cold climate heat pumps, so at HSPF of 10 or greater. And it has been challenging. We've still had some success this year. We still had pretty good participation, but just adding on to the education comment, it's so much about the contractors too, and getting them to now start restocking a different product than they used to have, and just getting, trying to change that mindset that, this will run below 0 degrees and not just cut it at 30 degrees. And so, and I agree on the customer side too, but the contractors, it's just so hard to get them. And we've told them what our rebates are, and we still see applications come in for something less than 10, and it's so frustrating. But so we think we're making some gains there. We're really excited about the future, and that it was included in the potential study as the largest potential for residential going forward. So we're excited about that, and we think we're making some inroads.
Great. Okay. Did you want to add
Would you
something?
mind
Please do.
I added something, just
Yes, please.
a different take. More broadly, the potential study, and as Jason mentioned, the heat pumps were a significant, or possibly the significant technology that was going to replace home lighting in the future. And I have to be careful here because, I don't want to come off as utilities don't support, DSM, but we're responsible for, going out and talking to all these customers into making that upgrade, and responsible to, say, our executives for, achieving goals and incentives that are generated by doing this. So I'm understandably cautious about the potential that exists. What worries me is a heat pump, replacing your HVAC system, is not replacing your light bulb. And the pace at which that potential, appears in the potential study is concerning to me, because it is a bigger lift for customers to make that choice. Now, you can buy it. You can increase incentives to the point that there is, mass adoption. But you have to balance that against the near-term bill impacts to customers and what customers can bear, to pay for a program like that. And so those are the balance points. And I'll say that we think the potential is, the potential study is the best available information. And we're used to kind of running our own before the triennial. It was very nice that the state performed a statewide potential study. I got to tell my boss, hey, I saved customers $800,000. We had it budgeted and all that stuff. But so it is good information. I'm used to defending these kinds of things, so I hope I'm not offending you, Carl or Chris.
I think we'd have something to say about that.
Right. And we will be using this information in our upcoming resource plan. That total potential is reasonable. By 2029, we think that potential is there. The annual increases and really getting customers to make that choice, I think, is going to be a little slower.
No, I think those are really great points, Sean, and I always do appreciate your caution. And I think we collectively have an understanding that with the potential study, that there are some aggressive assumptions in there. And I think for all of us, the next steps really are kind of in the logistics of tapping into that potential, and that there are still a lot of questions about market barriers, opportunities, to your point about consumer education and adoption, and working with our contractors and trade allies. And so I think, as we think from a department perspective, as we think about next steps, that's really what we're thinking about, are some of those more that kind of next level market barrier characterization issues, so that we can further help utilities figure out how to work within their territories to be able to adopt some of those technologies that we pointed to in the potential study. So that's great. Moving on, I don't see anybody, I don't see a long line of people at the microphone, so I'm just going to keep asking questions. Ben, this one's for you specifically. Your work has focused on equity and low-income issues within the context of our energy policy. Historically, SIP has worked to serve low-income customers in collaboration with other programs like weatherization assistance. And there is a certain requirement for SIP spending to go towards low-income customers. What challenges do you see with that in the future, and what should utilities be thinking about in addressing low-income issues in future SIP programs and in the context of the potential that we've identified?
Sure. Well, I think we've already talked about, this concept of low-hanging fruit. And I think low-hanging fruit continues to exist in the low-income single-family and multifamily sector. But I think that will eventually all kind of start to get plucked away. And so I think thinking about how to continue to address that segment as low-income fruit, low-hanging fruit. Mixing up my phrases here. As low-hanging fruit continues to get picked away, and just how to continue to serve those customers. I think there's also just kind of, across utility planning, there's kind of the overarching question of, for example, existing and continuing federal rulemaking around lighting standards, things like that, and how that might influence, where we can, really count energy savings and how that factors into utility program planning. I think, with respect to some of the things mentioned in the report, space heating, for example, is, I think, a big opportunity for low-income single-family and multifamily. And, I think to the extent that that may include new or emerging technologies, that could potentially mean that, more expensive technologies are being, directed in the low-income segment, which would mean that low-income spending requirement in statute is, potentially easier to achieve or is met more quickly. And so I think, thinking about, of course, deeper energy savings is I think a great goal. We would certainly say that, and to the extent that that can include low-income households, of course, that's something that we want to work toward. But also kind of balancing that with how to really, make sure that we're serving, to the maximum extent possible, low-income households. And, if the spending requirement is met, through potentially more expensive technologies, that may mean less budget to go around for other households as well. But I think, again, the point that I really want to stress is the opportunity around coordination and, making sure that utilities are talking to each other as much as possible, that utilities are talking with trade allies and other contractors as much as possible, and really just finding, ways to really break down some of those pain points. But I think we do have, a great policy lever in the low-income spending requirement, and just kind of finding ways to continue to leverage that, as well as, other utility planning as well, to really serve that segment, I think is, what we hope to see over the next 10 years at least.
Sure, okay. Do you have anything you want to add to that in terms of your low-income programming and how you're working to address that sector?
I think Ben's right on. It's working with others. And we're not the only ones that are trying to help our low-income customers. And so bringing all forces to bear on the issue, I think, is a clear path to success. So that's a clear strategy in that segment.
Yeah, I would just add to that our strategy has always been using the community action partnerships. We use those, they basically implement all of our low-income house therapy program for the most part. And I think the minimum spending requirement for low-income for us is $110,000. We spend $180,000. There's no cap on it, so we can go ahead and spend it, which is great. So we're definitely, getting those dollars out there. The cap agencies seem to be using them, and we're seeing a lot of success.
Yeah, I think that's something, to recognize is that the spending requirement really is a minimum and that there is no cap on it. And one of the things that I think we hope to see is that, utilities are really able to take a close look at their service territories, understanding what the needs are in their service territories and spend and develop programs and coordinate with cap agencies and whatnot, to meet the need rather than to kind of focus on the floor of the requirement. And recognizing that a lot of many utilities do that. And so I think that's an area of particular interest for the department as well. So. I see the lights came on. Should that concern me? Nope, I keep going. Okay, you'll give me a sign? Okay, that's good, thank you. Moving on, and Ben, you'd mentioned this, and we've skirted around this issue a little bit. One of the program findings from the study is that trade allies, the contractors that install energy efficiency equipment, are very important to the success of programs. Can you talk about some of the ways that you work with trade allies now and how that might need to evolve over the next decade?
So I actually got involved with energy efficiency doing on-site home inspections of ductless heat pump installations. And so I kind of dove in directly with that contractor relationship. And I think that's, one of the keys is really becoming involved with the trade allies' day-to-day business and understanding how our programs or our activities can make their lives easier, help them utilize programs more efficiently, like literally, getting rebates more easily, and how they can sell more product. So I feel like coming from a position of empathy and a position of partnership will really help to cultivate trade allies who are leaders and who will really be sort of the spokespeople for the technology. And, we see it every day in the kind of 80